Hey YouTubers, welcome to the Cyber Overwatch channel. I am Pragmatic1. In this video, I'm going to cover two techniques, LLMNR/NBT-NS poisoning and NTLM relaying. What makes this pair so dangerous isn't a bug or a missing patch, it's that they weaponize Windows authentication functioning exactly as designed, no CVE required. These techniques turn the network's built-in trust against itself, and this has been an issue in enterprise environments for over 3 decades. I'll break down how these techniques work under the hood. Then, in part 2, execute these techniques in a lab environment and run the full chain against a TryHackMe vulnerable host, getting a view of how getting domain admin is possible. The demonstration machines that will be tested in part 2 are TryHackMe's breaching Active Directory and exploiting Active Directory, 2 intermediate level rooms from the AD learning path that put you up against a realistic Windows domain, rootdc.tryhackme.loc, complete with a domain controller and multiple member servers. Let's get to work. This video has 2 parts. In the first part, I'll cover the techniques in depth, what they are, where they come from, how they work technically, and how to execute and remediate them. In the second part, I'll demonstrate the full attack chain on a TryHackMe vulnerable AD host. Specifically in part 1, I'll cover what NTLM and SMB are and why attackers abuse it, the background and history of SMB relay and NTLM relay, who discovered these techniques and when, technical deep dive, how the NTLM challenge response protocol works and where it breaks, tools and best practices for executing these attacks on an engagement, best practices for remediating and defending against these attacks. In part 2, I'll perform a demonstration on the following: LLMNR/NBT-NS poisoning and net NTLM version 2 capture with responder, offline hash cracking with hashcat, identifying relaying targets with netexec and nmap, authentication coercion with a printer bug, NTLM relaying with npackets NTLM relay X, SAM dumping and system level access via the relayed session. If you find this content informative and you are interested in cybersecurity, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to the Cyber Overwatch channel. Also, for more free content, please regularly check back on www.cyberoverwatch.com. Before I dive into the technical content, let's map everything I'll be covering today to the MITRE ATT&CK framework so you can see exactly where poisoning and relaying sit in the attack lifecycle. T1557.001, adversary in the middle, LLMNR/NBT-NS poisoning and SMB relay. Responder poisons broadcast name resolution responses to coerce victims into authenticating to the attacker, capturing net NTLM version 2 material or relaying it forward. T1110.002, brute force, password cracking. Captured net NTLM version 2 hashes are cracked offline with hashcat mode 5600. T1550.002, use alternate authentication material. Pass the hash/relayed NTLM authentication is used to authenticate to a third host without ever recovering the plain text. T1046, network service discovery. netexec and nmap enumerate which hosts do not require SMB signing, building a relay target list. T1187, forced authentication. The printer bug coerces the target server into authenticating to the attacker on demand, feeding the relay. T1003.002, OS credential dumping, security account manager. The relayed session dumps the local SAM database from the target host. Now to discuss the background. To understand poisoning and relaying, you first need to understand what is being attacked. Let me briefly cover the essentials. NTLM Manager is a family of Microsoft authentication protocols that first shipped with Windows NT back in 1993. Kerberos has been the default authentication protocol in Active Directory since Windows 2000, but NTLM never went away. It's still used all over the place for backward compatibility. When you authenticate to a host by IP address instead of hostname for local account logons, and as a fallback whenever Kerberos can't be used. If it's a Windows network, NTLM is almost certainly still active on it. SMB, Server Message Block, is Microsoft's file sharing and remote administration protocol, listening on TCP port 445. When a user or a computer authenticates to an SMB service in an AD environment, that authentication is very frequently carried by NTLM. And here's the important part. NTLM is application protocol independent. The exact same authentication messages get carried inside SMB, HTTP, LDAP, MS SQL, and more. That property is what makes relaying so powerful. Here's the core problem. NTLM is a challenge response protocol, and nothing in the base protocol cryptographically binds an authentication attempt to a specific server it was meant for. If the server on the network don't enforce signing, an attacker who can get in the middle can take a perfectly valid authentication and forward it somewhere else entirely. Now let's get into the weeds a little. Before I explain the attack, let me explain what actually is happening when a Windows machine authenticates over NTLM. Understanding this is essential to understanding why the attack works. NTLM is a 3-message exchange. Step 1, negotiate. Type 1. The client sends a negotiate message to the server announcing the capabilities it supports, things like which NTLM version and whether it wants signing. Think of it as setting the ground rules for the exchange. Step 2, challenge. Type 2. The server responds with a challenge message containing an 8-byte random number, the server challenge or nonce, along with the target information and negotiated flags. Step 3, authenticate. Type 3. The client takes the challenge and computes a response using a hash derived from the user's password, then sends it back in an authenticate message along with the username, domain, and workstation name. The NTLM version 2, this response is an HMAC MD5 over the server challenge plus a blob containing a timestamp and a client challenge. The server or domain controller on its behalf verifies the response and access is granted. The critical thing to understand, the value that travels across the wire, the net NTLM version 2 response, is not the user's NT hash. You cannot pass the hash with it. You have exactly 2 things you can do with a captured net NTLM version 2. Crack it offline to recover the plaintext password or relay it to another server in real time. Relaying is the interesting one because it requires no cracking at all. If you forward the victim's authentication to a target that doesn't require signing, the victim computes a valid response to that target's challenge, and you are authenticated as the victim without ever knowing the password. Relaying and capturing both depend on one prerequisite: getting a victim to authenticate to you in the first place. There are 2 broad ways to make that happen. The first is name resolution poisoning. When a Windows machine tries to resolve a host name and DNS fails, say someone fat fingers a file share or a machine looks for a server that no longer exists, Windows falls back to broadcast and multicast protocols, LLMNR on UDP 5355, NBT-NS on port UDP 137, and MDNS on UDP 5353. These protocols essentially shout, "Does anyone know who file server 1 is?" to the whole local segment. There's no authentication on the answer. Responder simply replies, "Yes, that's me." The victim connects and authenticates, and now I have the net NTLM version 2 hash. The second and much more reliable is authentication coercion. Rather than waiting for a mistake, I use a Windows RPC feature to force a target to authenticate to me on demand. The classic is the printer bug, which abuses the MS-RPRN print system remote protocol. Any domain user can ask the host running the print spoiler to notify them of print jobs and point that notification at an arbitrary machine, mine in this case, triggering authentication. There are others in the same family. Petit Potam abuses MS EFS RPC, and DFS Course abuses MS DFS NM, being the well-known ones. These are the tools that turn relaying from wait and hope into point and shoot. So I've got the victim authenticating to me. Why can't I forward that to another server and have it accepted? Because of SMB signing. When SMB signing is enforced, every packet in the session is signed using a key derived from the authentication. A relay attacker sits in the middle but never possesses the session key, so they cannot forge valid signatures, and that relayed session collapses. The catch is the default posture. By default, only domain controllers require SMB signing. Workstations and member servers historically negotiate signing but do not require it, which is exactly the gap relaying drives through. There's a second layer worth knowing. Microsoft added Message Integrity Code, or MIC, to protect the NTLM message flow from tampering. In 2019, researchers found a way to strip it, which meant an attacker could downgrade the signing negotiation and relay to protocols like LDAP. And for TLS wrapped protocols like LDAP-S and HTTPS, there's extended protection for authentication, or EPA, which binds the authentication to the TLS channel, where EPA is an enabled cross-protocol relays to things like Active Directory certificate services succeed. The whole offensive-defensive story of relaying is really a story of signing the MIC and EPA and where each one is missing. Let's get into the history. SMB Relay was first publicly demonstrated back in March 21st, 2001, when Josh Buckbinder, better known as Sir Distic of the hacker group Cult of the Dead Cow, released a tool called SMB Relay at the AtlantaCon convention in Atlanta. In his own words, this wasn't a bug, it was a fundamental design flaw in the protocol, and it took him less than 2 weeks to write the tool. That's a 20-plus-year-old technique that, in its modern form, still works on a huge percentage of real networks today. For years, the attack was mostly used in its reflection form, relaying a victim's authentication straight back to the machine it came from. Microsoft killed that specific variant in 2008 with the MS-08068 patch, but MS-08068 only stopped reflecting auth back to the same host. Relaying it forward to a different host was left wide open, and that's the technique that matters today. The technique's modern renaissance came from a series of researchers. In 2017, Byte Leader published a widely read practical guide to NTLM relaying, and CrackMap exec gained the ability to auto-generate relay target lists. In 2018, Lee Christensen disclosed the printer bug, giving attackers reliable on-demand coercion. In 2019, researchers at Preempt disclosed CVE-2019-1040, the drop the mic bug, and Dirk-Jan Mollema built the exploit into the tooling, opening up relaying to LDAP for full domain compromise via resource-based constrained delegation. Then in 2021, Gilles Lionel released Petit Potam, tracked as CVE-2021-36942, which paired beautifully with Spectre Ops certified pre-owned research on Active Directory certificate services to produce the ESC8 attack, relaying a coerced domain controller to the ADCS web enrollment endpoint and walk away with a certificate for the DC itself. The engine that ties all of this together is Impacket's NTLM Relay X, originally authored by Dirk-Jan Mollema, excuse me for the pronunciation, as the successor to the older SMB Relay X. It's now the standard relay framework, accepting inbound SMB and HTTP and relaying out to SMB, LDAP, HTTPS, MSSQL, and more, with automated SAM dumping, RBCD, shadow credentials, and ESC8 built in. The technique is still evolving, and recently as 2025, CVE-2025-33073 revived NTLM reflection against hosts that don't enforce signing. Now let's discuss some best practices. When executing poisoning and relaying on an authorized engagement, following structured best practices ensures you get results efficiently while minimizing risks to the client's environment. Here's how I approach it. 1. Scope and authorization first. Before you touch the network, confirm your rules of engagement explicitly permits adversary in the middle techniques. Responder affects the entire broadcast domain, and coercion tools like Petit Potam and MITM6, man in the middle 6, can genuinely cause outages. Know exactly what's in the scope and what the client's tolerance is for disruption. 2. Start passive. Analyze before poisoning. Run responder in analyze mode first. This observes LLMNR, NBT-NS, and MDNS traffic without answering anything. It tells you how noisy the segment is and which name lookups are failing, so your active phase is targeted rather than a shot in the dark. 3. Enumerate relay targets. Find hosts without SMB signing. Relaying only works against hosts that do not require SMB signing. Build a list before you fire anything. Number 4. Decide. Capture and crack or relay. If your target set enforces signing, you're limited to capturing net NTLM version 2 and cracking offline. If you found unsigned targets, relaying is far more reliable because it never depends on weak passwords. On a real engagement, I prefer relaying. Number 5. Configure responder for relaying. When you intend to relay, turn responder's own SMB and HTTP servers off so NTLM Relay X can bind to port 445 and 80. Set SMB to off and HTTP to off in the /etc/responder/responder.conf. Responder still poisons. NTLM Relay X catches the connections. Number 6. Coerce. Don't wait. Passive poisoning depends on user mistakes. Coercion is deterministic. Check whether the spooler is reachable, then trigger it. Number 7. Relay to the highest value action available. SMB relay to dump the SAM or run a command where signing blocks SMB, relay cross protocols to LDAPs for RBCD or to ADCS for ESC8. Always relay to where the identity you captured actually has privilege. Number 8. Document everything. Capture timestamps, commands, poison requests, and output at every step. Because these techniques rely on live victim authentication, clear evidence of what you triggered and when is essential for the final report and for the client to reproduce your findings. Understanding the defensive side is just as important as understanding the offensive side. The good news with relaying is that the controls are decisive. One of them, applied properly, shuts the whole thing down. Here are the industry accepted best practices. Number 1. Enforce SMB signing everywhere, servers and clients. This is the single most impactful control. Via GPO, set Microsoft Network Client/Server digitally sign communications always to enable on every machine, not just domain controllers. A relay attacker cannot forge the signature, so relayed sessions fail outright. Note that Windows 11 24H2 and Server 2025 now require SMB signing by default on client connections. Number 2. Enable LDAP signing and LDAP channel binding on domain controllers. Set the DC to require LDAP server signing and set LDAP enforce channel binding to 2 always under the NTDS parameters. This blocks cross-protocol relay to LDAP and LDAP-S. That leads to RBCD and domain takeover. Number 3, disable LLMNR, NBT-NS, and MDNS. Kill the poisoning primitives at the source. Disable LLMNR via GPO. Turn off multicast name resolution equals enabled. Disable NBT-NS per adapter by setting NetBIOS over TCP/IP to disabled, ideally pushed via DHCP option or a startup script. Test MDNS removal carefully. It can affect device discovery. Number 4, disable WPAD and enable extended protection for authentication. Disable the web proxy auto discovery protocol in browser auto detect settings to remove the rogue proxy vector. Enable EPA with require SSL on HTTP, LDAP, AD, CS, Exchange, and MS SQL endpoints so authentication is bound to the TLS channel and can't be relayed. Number 5, the coercion surface. Apply the Petit Potam patches. KB5005413/CVE-2021-36942. Disable the print spooler service on servers and domain controllers that do not need it to neutralize the printer bug where possible. Apply RPC filters to the EFS RPC and DFS NM interfaces. Number 6, least privilege in tiering. Set the machine account quota, ms-ds-machine account quota, to 0, so ordinary users can't add computer accounts or RBCD. Implement tiered administration so high privileged accounts never authenticate to low trust hosts. If a domain admin never logs into a workstation, there's nothing valuable to relay from it. Detection. Deploy honeypot name queries and monitor event IDs. Periodically have endpoints request a host name that should never resolve. Anything that answers is a poison. Monitor UDP 5355, 137, and 5353 for non-DC responders, and watch for a workstation subtly acting as an SMB or HTTP server. On the host side, watch security events 4624, logon type 3 from unexpected sources, 4776, NTLM authentication to unexpected hosts, servers, and service creation events 4697 and 7045 that betray relay-based remote execution. Thank you for watching part 1 of Relaying Active Directory, a technical deep dive. Let me quickly recap what I covered. I started with the foundational context, what NTLM and SMB are, why NTLM is still everywhere despite Kerberos being the default for over 2 decades, and the one property that makes relaying possible. NTLM doesn't bind in authentication to the server it was meant for. I walked through the NTLM challenge response flow step by step, negotiate, challenge, and authenticate messages, and I explained the critical distinction that trips people up. The net NTLM version 2 on the wire is not the NT hash, so your only options are to crack it offline or relay it live. I covered both ways to get a victim to authenticate to you: passive name resolution poisoning with LLMNR, NBT-NS, and MDNS, and active coercion with printer bug and its cousins. And I explained why relaying works at all: the SMB signing gap, the MIC, and EPA. I went over the history too, from Sir Distic's original SMB relay in 2001 through the MS-08-068 patch to the modern renaissance driven by the printer bug, drop the mic, Petit Potam, and ESC8, all tied together by Impacket's NTLM Relay X. On the offensive side, I walked through 8 structured best practices: scoping passive analysis, enumerating unsigned targets with netexec and nmap, configuring responder for relaying, coercing with printer bug, and relaying to the highest value action available. On the defensive side, the controls are well understood but frequently not implemented. Enforce SMB signing everywhere. That one control alone breaks the whole attack. LDAP signing and channel binding, killing LLMNR, NBT-NS, and MDNS. EPA, reducing the coercion surface, and detection through honeypot queries and event ID monitoring. In part 2, I'll take everything covered in this video and execute it live against TryHackMe's breaching Active Directory and exploiting Active Directory rooms, a realistic Windows domain with a domain controller and member servers. I'll demonstrate the full chain from poisoning and capturing all the way to relayed system level SAM dump. Be on the lookout for part 2 in the coming weeks. Thank you for checking out the Cyber Overwatch channel. If you found this content useful and you are interested in cybersecurity, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to the Cyber Overwatch channel. It helps the channel grow. If you have any questions, drop it in the comments or reach out through the Cyber Overwatch website, linked in the description. Until next time, keep learning. The only way to improve is to keep learning. Pragmatic One, signing off.